Hello to everyone who has joined us today, wherever you are in this beautiful world, from the mountains to the prairies, from our homes and native lands, in places where the trains always run on time and in those where they never do. Thank you so much for taking the time to join your colleagues in participating in today's discussion. My name is Angelique Pereira. I will be joined shortly by my cohort and your presenter for today, Jeff Bartow, who will be taking us through all of the interesting information we are about to hear. Jeff and I are trust strategists here at Symantec, the first original and leading SSL TLS certificate authority and the trusted sole supplier of true and complete website security. It is our duty to help you put security first by keeping you up to speed on what is new, what is now, and what is next in security and trust. Now, I'm really looking forward to hearing all that Jeff has to share with us today, but before he does that, let's take care of some housekeeping. First, you are going to want to switch from a wireless connection to a wired connection. You'll also want to disable distractions such as pop-up blockers and instant messages and email notifications, because this is the type of information that you are going to want to pay full attention to. Then please do submit any questions you have as they pop into your mind. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. However, if we are not able to get to all of the questions, we will ensure the questions are answered once the webinar has concluded. You are also welcome to follow and contribute to this conversation on Twitter with the hashtag ISTR22. Thirdly, please continue this conversation with your Symantec security specialists or account managers and all the others supporting you in our sales, product, and marketing organizations. If you don't have their contact information, we will list it as the last slide of this presentation, so please do stay for that. Fourth, we are recording this discussion, which will be made available after we conclude today, along with the Internet Security Threat Report infographic, which is available for download in the attachment section of this page. You can experience this insight again or share it with your colleagues who couldn't join us today by simply using the link that got you here in the first place. And then please do rate this briefing. We also welcome comments to supplement your ratings. We do rely on your feedback to consistently improve our communications with you. Last but not least, and out of respect for everyone in our audience today, I understand that English may not be your first language. I do hope that this welcome and this housekeeping has allowed you the time to get accustomed to my voice, my pacing, and my accent. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Now, before we get into the facts and stats and figures and really great predictions, I do want to cover really quickly why we do this Internet Security Threat Report. And it's because it is important. It's a really big distinction of ours, and it's something that we are very proud of because it delivers you some value. The internet is a very scary and frightening place, and it doesn't have to be. By working together, our vision is for a completely trusted internet experience for all of us on the supplying side, but also for the consumers. At the end of the day, we all want a trusted internet user experience, and this is part of that, and we really believe in making that real. We also believe in doing things like this Internet Security Threat Report and our monthly threat briefings, all the webinars and all the blogs that we give you for free. We do this out of a sense of leadership. We are expanding the concept of complete website security, not just to be about SSL and TLS, but to be much more than that. And that is a leadership stance that we here at Symantec are very proud of. Also, this is what delivers you actual value. And often in our industry, we hear, oh, SSL is just a commodity. Why should I pay more? And this right here is the reason why. There is so much that we can see and can deliver to you as a value to your organization, such as leveraging us and our core competence so that you can focus on things that make your organization shine. You can really pay attention to your business and let us handle the security portion of this because we are best at it, and that delivers immaterial business value to you that goes way beyond the idea of, oh, it's just a commodity, why pay more? Now with that said, making all of those real, each one of those positions, our vision, our leadership, our value, comes forth in that Symantec has the most comprehensive source of internet threat data across the globe. There is nobody on the planet that sees more than us and records all threats and the areas of compromise and opportunities to protect yourself and to protect that fundamental trust on the internet within your environment. Now, what makes the Internet Security Threat Report unique? Well, this report is based on data from the Symantec Global Intelligence Network, which, as you may know, provides an overview and analysis of the year in global threat activity and is one of the world's most comprehensive vulnerability database, which currently consists of more than 88,900 recorded vulnerabilities, spanning more than 2 decades, from 24,560 vendors, representing over 78,900 products. These resources give Symantec analysts unparalleled sources of data with which to identify, analyze, and provide informed commentary on emerging trends in attacks, malicious code activity, phishing, and spam. Right, now that I've got you all caught up, let's see what interesting data and information Jeff has to share with us.
Well, thank you very much, Angelique, and welcome to everybody again. You'll notice the not only change in speakers, but the change in accents too. So Angie gave you plenty of time to get used to hers, and I hope you can quickly become accustomed to mine. Let's start today's content with an overview of what we'll cover today, as the ISTR, as we refer to it, always covers the previous year. We're going to spend one short slide on 2016 in numbers, and then we're going to move on to cover 3 main areas affecting website security: cybercrime and the underground economy, ransomware, including the biggest cyber attack in history, which just happened last month, plus web attacks and vulnerabilities. And then we're going to recap our predictions before we move onward to the recommendations that you can use to increase the security of your website and your organization's data environment. So let's begin. Cybercriminals revealed new levels of ambition in 2016, a year which was marked by extraordinary attacks, including multi-million-dollar virtual bank heists and overt attempts by state-sponsored groups, notably to disrupt the United States of America's electoral process. Now, analysis of data and attacks show that attackers are using simple techniques, but sometimes with devastating results. And this is quite compelling because by the end of 2016, over half of the human population of the Earth was using the Internet. So it's no surprise that, for example, in 2016, the year claimed the record for e-commerce sales as expected on Cyber Monday, which is usually seen as the biggest online shopping day of the holiday season. And this is usually distinct from Black Friday, which is usually considered to be the biggest in-store shopping day of the holiday season. But in what seems to be, again, no surprise, 2016 also set a record for Black Friday's online sales too. And they both totaled over $3 billion US in online e-commerce sales. However, skipping to the last bullet on this page, along with profitability for e-commerce, the ecosystem was fruitful for cyber criminals too. Of course, it wasn't just money they were after, but identities, and also to influence governments and politics. Hence, we saw some prominent action begun by browsers, each which announced their intention to eventually mark all non-encrypted pages and sites. In other words, pages which don't use SSL or TLS as not secure in ways that are unavoidable and visible to all to all users. Angelique?
Wow, Jeff, the recorded e-commerce sales figures for Black Friday and Cyber Monday are staggering, and I'm pretty sure that a large portion of my salary actually contributed towards that amount. But moving on, thank you to everyone that has already started to submit questions. We have a couple that have come through, and for those that have just joined us, we encourage you to submit any questions that you have as they pop into your mind. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. However, if we are unable to get to all of the questions, we will ensure that your questions are answered once the webinar has concluded. Now, Jeff, I am seriously curious about and looking forward to what cybercrime and the underground economy look like over the past year.
Well, let's go there, Angelique. You know, it was a rather disturbing trend that emerged in 2016, and that trend saw attackers using legitimate Windows programs to download and execute malicious payloads. And it's a tactic called living off the land. Now, it's a funny name, but it refers to attackers using whichever tools are on hand as vectors for their attack's delivery. And usually these are pretty common and so familiar that the average user just inherently trusts them. And the criminals are leveraging that. That includes things like Microsoft Word documents and email applications, PowerPoint and PowerShell and PDF documents, and of course legitimate network administration software and operating system features. Even Internet of Things or IoT devices have become a tool for hackers. So this living off the land doesn't just take advantage of what users have in their environment. It also takes advantage of users themselves because these tools are so ubiquitous that most victims are running these programs or can run them. So they're easy to use for malicious purposes. In fact, they're much easier than methods we've seen in the past, like finding and exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities and writing sophisticated malware and things like that. Now, you're going to notice a theme across this webinar as well as in the ISTR report itself, and that is how these everyday tools have been used and abused by attackers. It's a part of almost every other trend we're going to talk about today. Now, on that note, if you haven't done so already, please go get the Internet Security Threat Report, and not only for yourself, but share it. We offer it to you for free, and in fact to anybody who wants it. So it's so useful in understanding exactly what risks exist for your organization and for your customers and for your employees. You'll also notice that I'm not going to cover everything on this slide, nor I will on future slides. In the interest of time, I can't. So please make use of the available attachments and downloads, which you can access right now, and including in those attachments are these slides plus other documentation and infographics. Now, the most high-profile attack of using living off the land methods actually occurred during the U.S. election of last November. A simple spear phishing email provided access to the email account, including the content and secrets and contacts and details of a man named John Podesta. He was the manager of Hillary Clinton's failed campaign for the U.S. presidency. Now, what's of note is that the attackers accessed Mr. Podesta's Gmail account without the use of any malware or vulnerabilities. Again, there's a lot on this slide, and you can see all the details offline by downloading these slides from our attachments section. They're available right now. But back to the story. This living off the land trend shows a movement away from exploits and custom tools. And it's important to note that there's a malware component to every other attack. There we go. There's the slide. Malware continues to be a significant chunk of the threat landscape, with more than 357 million new variants observed across 2016. But while that sounds like a lot, it's actually not all that bad, because for the first time, the rate of new malware seen on the endpoint, and when we say endpoint, we mean your PC or your tablet or your mobile phone, hasn't changed much. It's only increased by about 0.5% from the previous year, 2015. However, while this rate of new malware variants was pretty stable, for the first part of 2016, the latter half of the year saw actually an explosion of new variants. And this was driven mainly by the high volume of ransomware downloaders that was propagated over email. As you see by the course we're charting at the top of these slides, we're going to be talking about ransomware in just a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. But continuing on malware and cybercrime, you might be wondering how malware gets onto your endpoint or into your organization's environment. And there's a big method right here. The average office worker receives 600 emails per week, and typically at least 5 of those contain malware. Now, of course, email is a pretty vital communication tool, but it's also one of the prime sources for disruption for end users and organizations. And this disruption isn't just being distracted in your work by getting more email. It can range from unwanted emails in the form of spam to more dangerous threats like the propagation of ransomware or targeted spear phishing campaigns. And this is exactly what kicked off the chain of events I covered in the last slide about the 2016 presidential election. The most noteworthy trend that we observed through 2016 was the uptick in email malware rates. That rate nearly doubled from 1 in about 220 emails to 1 in 131 emails in 2016. Now, tying back to the idea of living off the land, email has become the main vector for malware propagation. So you might be wondering, does this apply to me? Who is really at risk? Malware delivered by email hit businesses of all sizes in 2016. But despite the headlines filled with brands that you know and use and love and look up to, it wasn't just enterprises and large businesses that were hit the hardest. It was the small and medium-sized businesses, that is, usually businesses with between 250 and 500 employees, that got the most impact. And regardless of the size of the organization in which or for which you work, all of us are at risk. Now, if email is the hottest vector for attack and malware is the prominent payload, then what are the effects of these attacks? In 2016, over 1 billion identities, well over that, were stolen in data breaches, almost double the number that were stolen in 2015, when just 563 million identities were stolen. And I say just with some degree of amazement. That's a lot of identities. Nevertheless, take a look back at 2014 for the full story. The total number of exposed identities has fluctuated over time. 2016 was actually lower than 2014, although not by much. Yet all told, over 7 billion identities were exposed via breaches in the past 8 years alone. Do the math on who's using the internet, and some people got hit 2, 3, 4, multiple times. Now, we hear all the time about what we call PII, or personally identifiable information. And that's usually like names and contact information, sometimes passwords or login names. But we don't often hear about PFI, or personal financial information, until now. Because that's the credit card or debit card numbers or banking and financial records. And it's those PFI records that amounted to almost 40% of the information that was lost in data breaches in 2016. But that's just what information was lost, not from whom it was lost. Services was the industry most affected by data breaches during 2016, with almost 45% of breaches occurring in the services industry. The second most affected sector was finance, insurance, and real estate. That came at 22%. That is a total of 67%, so the majority of breaches there, well over 2/3. And while those percentages are alarming, what's worse is that it's these same two sectors, these broad verticals, that had the highest number of losses in 2015 too. Angelique?
Thanks, Jeff. Now, another buzzword in the latest news is ransomware, and you heard Jeff say it a couple of times. And I think the majority of us will recognize this word from the latest and most widespread ransomware attack, WannaCry, that affected millions of people all over the world, which Jeff will touch on a bit later. And as previously stated, we have seen a record spike in cybercrime activity involving ransomware. Now, Jeff, help us explore this phenomenon by analyzing the trends.
Well, thank you very much for bringing me to this. It's something I'd love to talk about. You heard me mention it before, and that's the scary topic of ransomware. It's not the theft of your information necessarily, but when your information is actually held hostage. And it's often from your own systems or computers or devices. During 2016, ransomware was one of the most significant threats facing both individuals and organizations, and in 2016, attackers seem to have nearly perfected the ransomware business model. They're using strong encryption and Bitcoin payments, and vast spam campaigns to create dangerous and wide-ranging malware. What's more worrisome is that the number of new ransomware families is increasing, and this signals that more and more cyber criminals are actually getting involved. It's attractive to them. In fact, if you listen to the website Security Threat Briefing, which Angelique and I host every month on one of these Symantec Bright Talk channels, you're going to see how nation states might be including ransomware in their arsenals. Governments are getting into ransomware. Now, consumers in particular bear the brunt of 69% of all ransomware infections, but this year saw evidence that ransomware attackers may be branching out and developing even more sophisticated attacks, like targeting ransomware on businesses. Those attacks involved initial compromise, then a network traversal, and that leads to encryption of multiple machines, business machines, not personal machines, but business computing power and therefore business data. There are literally hundreds of different ransomware families out there, which are spread through a variety of methods, but the most active ransomware threats seen in 2016 are usually spread by, you guessed it, the living off the land vector of email. We keep coming back to that. So what are the ransom demands of these attackers? First, know that ransom is very lucrative. There's money in it. Not only are the presence of attacks and the scope of these attacks on the rise, but so are the ransom amounts. The average ransom in 2016 was over 3 times the size of 2015's average ransom. What's worse is the increasing amounts of ransom that happen if the payment isn't received by a certain deadline, or if the victim is a business, not an individual. In fact, the highest ransom demand in 2016 was for a single machine, and it was nearly $30,000 US. That's over 26 times the average ransom demand, and many suspect that attackers believe that victims can be squeezed for higher and higher ransoms. Now, according to research carried out by the Norton Cyber Security Insight team, 34% of victims worldwide will pay the ransom. What's more, the percentage nearly doubles regarding ransomware victims in the United States of America. And this provides some indication as to why the USA, as a country, is so heavily targeted. Attackers have also become more creative in their attempts to extract more from victims. Several newer ransomware families feature variable ransom demands, including raising ransom amounts as time elapses, as I mentioned. For example, the Cerber ransomware will double its ransom demand from about $3,400 to nearly $6,800 US just after 5 days if the ransom is not paid. There are now hundreds of different ransomware families, and they're spread through a variety of methods, but the most active ransomware threats seen in 2016 were, you guessed it again, spread by email, again, living off the land. And while ransomware attacks to date have been largely indiscriminate, there's evidence that attackers have a growing interest in hitting organizations, businesses with targeted attacks. Because although it's relatively small in number compared to the mass mailed threats, these can be devastating for organizations which are affected, because there's potentially hundreds of computers affected, encrypted and affected at once. And why? Because businesses often have bigger pockets than individuals do. Their budgets are bigger, their bank accounts are bigger. So of course, if you're looking for evidence of ransomware, there was no more prominent demonstration of it than last month's attack of the WannaCry ransomware, which now has the title of not just the biggest ransomware attack ever, but the biggest cyber attack ever. WannaCry searches for and encrypts 176 different file types and appends a certain extension, .wcry, to the end of the file name. It then asks users to pay a $300 US ransom, but do so in Bitcoin. The ransom note indicates that the payment amount will be doubled, like I said earlier, after 3 days. 4 days after that, if the payment is still not claimed, the WannaCry malware claimed that the encrypted files would be deleted. We haven't seen much evidence of that. Nevertheless, as you see on the screen, hundreds of thousands of computers across 150 countries worldwide were hit by WannaCry during its rapid emergence, beginning on Friday, May 12th. What you see on the screen is time slices 12 hours apart as it spread and reached critical mass in certain parts of the world. Look at the most populous countries. Look at the most developed countries. Look at the so-called developing countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and how quickly they got hit. Now, while a patch for the vulnerabilities that were accessed by WannaCry was made available by Microsoft in March 2016, and that was, or 2017, that was nearly 2 months before WannaCry's outbreak. Clearly, not everybody installed these patches. Some users, or even organizations, like the 10,000 plus organizations that got hit by WannaCry, simply dismiss or disregard patches because they're often seen as inconvenient interruptions of the things we'd rather be doing on our computers, like email, for example, or actual work, or online shopping, or goofing off on social media, or playing games, or whatever. And it's so sad that our habits have included disregarding the very things which could have kept us safe from what turned out to be the world's largest ever cyber attack. Now, of course, in a shameless plug for Symantec and our Norton brand, our anti-malware software blocked WannaCry for all the consumers and organizations using our software, of course, assuming that those individuals and companies kept their malware definitions up to date. You'll see this in the recommendations. And those who did simply went on with their lives and their work and their money without getting caught up in WannaCry's clutches. Well, while we all have to consider the very hard lessons that we've learned from the WannaCry incident, I'm going to hand it back to Angelique momentarily.
Thanks, Jeff. Very interesting information there regarding ransomware. Now, I am seeing some great questions come through from the audience, and I am really looking forward to getting some of them answered. But before we tackle these questions, let's take a look at the fascinating but scary web attacks toolkits and how cybercriminals exploited vulnerabilities online. Jeff, what can you tell us?
Apologies, I was on mute there. I thank you for handing back to me. I'd love to talk about this. There's been a distinct shift in the cybersecurity landscape, as I mentioned before, as web attacks actually fell by almost a third compared year on year. This shift involved a move away from exploit kits being used as the primary infection vector to, as we've shown several times already, email being the favorite threat delivery method of attackers. Now, this decline is a distinct contrast with 2015, where the number of web attacks had actually doubled from the previous year. However, despite the drop, web attacks are still a pretty big problem. And since we're in the business of preventing security problems but not allowing them, so Symantec really doesn't have data to offer on the number of web attacks each day, but we can count how many we've blocked each day. On an average, we block nearly 230,000 web attacks every single day, or at least that's what we did in 2016. Now, on one hand, that's good news because that number is a third smaller than the previous year's daily blocks, so things are getting better there. But the bad news is that the percentages of websites which we've scanned contained vulnerabilities, and that percentage that contained vulnerabilities remained at the same high level that it's been at for the last number of years. Our data finds that about 75%, and that varies about 1% either way, contain vulnerabilities. It's very little variation per year. So remember those patches which I mentioned earlier that consumers and organizations keep neglecting? So look, if I didn't make my point earlier, put it this way. Vulnerabilities open the door to attacks. Websites are still a critical element in attacks. They're a way into your company network, a way into your data, and a way to reach your customers and your partners and your employees, which ends up putting them at risk while it puts you and the business you work so hard to make it successful at risk too. We call ourselves website security for a reason, because website security is so much more than mere SSL certificates or encryption or ways to manage SSL certificates. Never before has website security been so critical to your organization's success, much less its very existence. Angelique, take us onward.
Well, no, thanks, Jeff. So where I'm really happy to see that the number of web attacks blocked per day have dropped, I am still quite concerned that the percentage of websites scanned which contain vulnerabilities remained at that same high level. Now, Jeff, what does Symantec predict for the future?
All sorts of things. And actually, before we deliver our recommendations and predictions on how you can use the information in the ISTR to increase your website security, including the usage of SSL certificates for invoking TLS encryption, let's review some of the recommendations and predictions we've made over the past year, since even before our previous year's ISTR. So this is all of 2016 and some of 2015 too. Now, this was announced in 2016, but it was implemented in January 2017. Significant changes to the Firefox and Chrome browsers have effectively required that you assess your website security now, right now, now, as they say where Angelique lives, such that your web pages are not flagged visibly as being not secure. This assessment is in contradiction to the way that website operators have implemented SSL and TLS to date. And that obsolete method was to encrypt data only when it was deemed absolutely crucial to do so. And even then, doing so was more or less optional anyway. You didn't really have to do it. Now, practically speaking, that method typically only used encryption on login pages or when PII or PFI, one I mentioned before, was about to be transmitted across our very public and very scary internet that Angelique was talking about. So what actually has changed? First of all, browsers definitely did their part. They refreshed something that we've been talking about at Symantec for years, and that's the idea of what we call always-on SSL. And this is where the customer's entire experience with your website is encrypted. Every site, every server, every host name, every page, every image, every feed, every frame. Do you get it? Now, as the bottom image shows, if the user's browsing experience can access it, then you should encrypt it. That's the idea of always-on SSL. Now, what the Firefox and Chrome browsers did this past January was to start notifying users with wording and colors and iconography that a web page is, in these words, not secure. Sometimes they put it in red. If such a page asks for a password or a payment card without using SSL or TLS. And with these browser changes, website security is no longer considered a nicety. Rather, website security is now table stakes for organizations of all sizes which have an online presence. There are lots of reasons why this is happening. Of course, on the demand side, governments are now requiring their sites to use HTTPS. And obviously, HTTPS invokes the SSL certificate and its ensuing TLS encryption. And now there's the HTTP2 protocol, which is gaining traction, and it's going to replace the HTTP protocol, which most of the web has used up until now. Moreover, certain search engines, you know, a certain one that starts with G, give a ranking boost of about 5% in our studies to sites, and I stress sites, not pages, sites which use HTTPS in always-on SSL methods instead of just HTTP. Now, on the supply side of things versus the demand side, SSL certificates are super affordable now. Some vendors are even providing complimentary certificates, and I might note that some of these vendors prominently include partners of Symantec. But some CDNs also provide SSL too. And this trend is highly likely to grow. More than 50% of downstream web traffic is now encrypted, and that's expected to grow to beyond 70% in 2017, the year that we're in. Now, we believe that website security starts with encryption, but it does not end there. Just because a website uses HTTPS and encrypts data does not mean that it's actually secure, because a phishing site can use an SSL certificate. And a site can be infected with malware, which means that malware can be pushed to you under the cover of SSL encryption. And that's right past your firewall and scanners in your perimeter. So now to achieve basic, actual, real website security, consider the second function of SSL and TLS. It's not just to encrypt data, but to provide validation that this is the real site, the real server, the real organization that you think it is. It's legitimacy. And only certain SSL certificates, namely organization validation or extended validation, we call them OV and EV certificates, can demonstrate to your site visitors that it's really your site and that you're a legitimate organization or business. Mere encryption cannot do that. There's no way that encryption can do that alone. So sure, I'm going to use this term loosely, let's encrypt all the data, but let's also validate who is real versus who is not. And you don't get that simply through encryption. Luckily, organizations and standards bodies are among those catching onto this idea that without organization validation, encryption is not secure. Angelique?
Thanks so much, Jeff. I really always have and still do find Always on SSL quite interesting, and I really am looking forward to that number of the encrypted downstream web traffic growing from more than 50% to beyond 70% in 2017. So we've covered quite a bit of some worrying yet important and vital information. But Jeff, before we end the discussion and move into questions, are you able to provide any Symantec recommendations to the audience on how they can use the information in this Internet Security Threat Report to increase their web security and to instill trust?
Yes, absolutely. Boy, you haven't even gotten me to my slide. I'm already excited to do so. Look, before encryption effectively becomes a mandate, you and your organization still have time to stand apart from the crowd. Because there's a tally keeper in the SSL and TLS industry called Netcraft, and they found, listen to this, that nearly 20,000 blocked attacks in just one quarter of 2017, the first quarter of this year, used a valid SSL certificate. And that's so shocking because the overwhelming majority of these sites contained no validation. The certificates had no validation of the organization running these sites, which means they were probably phony. We're talking about certificates that are known as domain validation or DV certificates. And they're the cheapest on the internet to buy because they can be processed immediately simply because the amount of validation they do is practically none. All it tests for is that you have rights to control the domain where you're going to put that SSL certificate. There's no identity check as to who you are or what you mean or that you're a real business or have any sense of legitimacy. So for a website security to be effective, it has to be implemented carefully and deliberately and monitored and maintained and must expand beyond just encryption. And actually, beyond SSL and TLS certificates. Now, you're going to see that model at the bottom that I presented before, and you can get your site there by aligning with what we've been talking about with Always on SSL and what the browsers are doing, Chrome and Firefox in particular, but also with so many industry standards which are now coming online, for example, the PCI. Or the payment card industry. You can disable deprecated and weak hashing algorithms. We saw the industry move beyond SHA-1, for example. You can implement Always on SSL, as I mentioned. You can use up-and-coming and very mobile-friendly and, frankly, millennial-friendly technologies like ECC certificates because they perform faster, but they are orders of magnitude more secure than the plain old SSL encryption of yore. But frankly, that's just the SSL and TLS part of your to-do list. A true website security approach will have you applying comprehensive but now affordable strategies like scanning your website for vulnerabilities and malware and even finding unknown SSL certificates. Now, along with these strategies to encrypt and validate your traffic and web applications, you'll want to use antivirus protection. Of course, we're going to talk about that. We are Symantec and the Norton brand, but you're going to also talk about it because you want to demonstrate in any way possible that your site is trustworthy. Not just secure, but trustworthy, because that sends a message to consumers that on this very public, very scary internet, it's safe on your site. Stop and think about this moment of time that you have to differentiate yourself from the competition. With everything I've covered in the first 3 sections of this webinar, it's going to be no shock that your website users would appreciate you conveying your ability to be trusted, because you can stand out as a trusted, secure site, again, on this very public, very threat-filled internet, and users really appreciate that. Of course, remember those first 3 sections I covered: cybercrime, ransomware, web attacks, as you move onward and upward from this webinar and this report. Now keep your operating system and other software updated, because you never know when you just might be blocking the next WannaCry. And in email, because it's such a target-rich environment, delete any suspicious-looking email that they just might contain links or attachments, especially from familiar apps. For example, be very wary of any Microsoft email attachment that advises you to enable macros to view its content. And of course, back up. Backing up important data is the single most effective way of coming back from a ransomware infection. Because once you clean up the infection, you can simply restore your unaffected backup and get right back up to work. Okay, Angelique, that about wraps it up for our content today, so please bring us home.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for taking us through all of that really interesting information. I myself took a lot out of the really great discussion that we've had. Just a quick reminder, the infographic as well as the presentation, the report, is available to download in your attachments and link section that is on this page. Jeff, I know that we're running out of time. Do you feel that we'll have time for one question?
Fire away, please.
All right, perfect. So I do have a couple, and just a reminder to the audience, we will ensure that your questions are answered even if we do not get to them on this webinar today. But I've got one for you here, Jeff, and it's a good one. Why did attackers shift from sophisticated tactics to living off the land last year?
It's a very simple, there's 2 reasons. One is because the average user is so familiar with the tools that you can use in living off the land. It's email, it's Word documents, it's PDF, it's Excel, all the documents we use, all the applications we use every day. That's the first reason, because there's inherent trust in those things, so people just kind of go along with it. Oh yeah, I could open this document because it's a Word document and I trust Word. But there's a second reason too, and that is because it's free. You don't have to spend money and time and what have you building code for malware or ransomware or what have you. You can simply embed that in vehicles that already exist. Angie? Wow.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really interesting. We really do have interesting questions. However, we are going to run out of time. So that does wrap up the content for today's briefing. However, even though our part of the briefing is concluded, yours is finally able to begin. Please do post suggestions or rate the discussion. We love to tune this discussion and other communications based on your collective feedback in order to help you get even more value from the next one. And please do browse our BrightTalk channel where you can check out all of our briefing webinars and more. Secondly, of course, we strongly encourage you to not wait until the next internet security threat discussion. Please actively continue this conversation with your security specialists, account managers, our SEs, and everyone else supporting you in our sales, product, and marketing organizations. And please feel free to drag your colleagues and peers along for the conversation. Do be on the lookout for a thank you email from Symantec for attending this discussion today, where we will provide you with the recording, full internet security threat reports, infographic, the works. It would all be shared with you. With that, thank you again for your time and your participation in today's discussion. On behalf of my cohorts and your presenter, Jeff, and equally on behalf of Symantec, the first original and leading SSL and TLS provider and your leader in true website security, goodbye, good day, and stay safe online.